Hey, so I have here a DC plug, which in this video I'm going to be doing something new, and I'm actually going to be working on the suit on camera. So right here I have my little makeshift workbench that I use. It's a silicone mat, and I have my glove for the LED, as well as the wires connecting it to the arm, and these plugs. Now, these plugs were just bought off Amazon for fairly cheap. They are little spring ones, which means I push the button down, push in the wire, and then I just flip it up, and that will lock the wires in place. Once the wires are locked in place though, I am going to be putting a drop of solder into each of them, just to lock it in place. And then at the end, I will be taking this tip for the soldering iron, and I will be welding these in place. Specifically the plug, which will be welded into the arm there, so that the glove will be detached. Now, to do this, I will first need to remove the LED from the arm. This is going to be the easiest part of the video, requiring me just to take these wire clippers and come here, side good length. So since I'm going to be having the plug in here, I will set it there, determine that it's just about up where the solder is, which means I'm going to add a bit of length and cut it right here. The reason I want to add a bit of length is so that there's less tension on the wires as it goes through. So I'm going to cut it. There we go. And now the LED is detached, and I am able to set this aside to work on later. Apologies for any noise you might be hearing in the background while I speak. Currently, at the same time as this, I am printing the next part of the helmet. Therefore, you will be hearing that as we go along, and you will be getting an update on how the helmet is coming along in the next video. I'm going to move the wrist piece up some so that it's easier for us to see and work with, as well as tilt it some where you can see. And the next thing I have to do is strip these wires. Now, I don't have a real good wire stripper. This is really a wire cutter, but it does the job if I just pinch it and pull. So see, I've just released the negative end. You can see the terminal there. And I will do the same on the positive end. Just there. Fine. Alright, that time. There we go. And now both of these leads are exposed. So, next part that we're going to do is I'm going to take these leads and I'm going to be inserting them into the DC plug simply by, as I said at the beginning, pushing down the button, pushing them as far as I can, and releasing the button. This one seems to be in nice and tight. I'm going to do the same with the negative, again pushing down the button and forcing in this wire as far as I can, and then releasing it. Both of these seem to be working good, but before we solder anything, I'm going to take this LED and strip this side so that we can test and make sure the LEDs turn on. So I'm going to repeat the same process I did for the other, that is pinch and strip. Positive wire seems to be stronger than the negative, same as with the wrist support. There we go, these are now both exposed, and I will give a closer view of it than I did with the other. Again, that's taking the lead, pushing the button down, and then pushing the lead all the way in there so it doesn't go any further, and then pinching it up. So the reason I'm tugging after I push these in is because that little tug verifies for me that it's all the way in and is getting a connection. Theoretically now, when I plug this in and then turn this on, it should light up. Which, as you can see, it does in fact light up, meaning that this plug is working. So, obviously we don't want to just rely on a single button holding it in place. We can, but it's just not as secure. So I'm going to be taking this and putting it down here, and we'll be welding this here and welding that there after we solder this in. Now, I've actually made a mistake in what I was originally saying, because I meant to cut this and put this down some, because otherwise my wrist will struggle to get out of there, and it will be very uncomfortable. So I'm going to come back after I go ahead and cut this out. Alright, and we're back. So what I ended up doing was heating this up and melting out this hole here, as well as carving out some of this in order to free up some space for this piece to go in. Now, as you can see, there's a bit of molten plastic bits from when I melted it out. So let's move those into the corner. It won't bother the video. And get to work on the next part. So as I showed before the cut, this plug does light up the actual LED. And I have cut out this hole so that I can now slide this back in here to be able to have the plug work without having to worry about it interfering with my wrist as much. Now, as you can see here, those little prongs there, those aren't going to work. That's going to be pushed by my wrist and the wires are going to release. Let's see. Put this on. Ow. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take this loose. I'm going to send it out the back so that we have more room to work with out here. And we're going to cut these off and we're going to solder it direct. So, as you see, the way this works, it's inside here, there's a little bit of metal, which you can see if I reflect just right into the camera. There we go, there's a tiny bit of metal back there. And when this is pushed down, that metal is revealed as well as the spring. When you release it, that means that metal has been moved up along with the ends of the wires. Now, there's another way we can get to this metal, and that's if we solder directly inside of there. So I can open this up, put this down in there, release it, and cut off the tops. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut off these tops and we're going to drop some solder in there instead, because that's going to allow us to have a perfectly flush top. As well as at the end, I'm going to take some excess solder and probably some of this right here, cover it up, fill in the gaps where it was, which will help me out. So let's get to work. Like I said, the first thing we're going to do is cut out these. Thankfully, those are fairly easy to just tug out of there. With this, staying fairly secure already. Do the same with the red, just pull it out, there we go. And it appears I did not have the red far enough in when I released it. Not an issue though, because the button should theoretically still work if I put it back in here. Just enough, yep, let's pop it down and get the wire back in there. I'm going to straighten this, push it down, all the way in there this time. Tug check. Okay, it's in. And pull this out. Okay, check this again. There we go, both passed the tug check. And you can see them inside of there. See that little shimmer in there. So the next thing we're going to do is take some solder and I'm just going to drop it inside. Actually, before that, I'm going to cut off just a little bit more of this. There we go. There we go. Just to get us a little bit closer to the wires, as well as make it a little bit flat. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is solder. So I have my solder right here. And I'm going to use the thinner solder. I have two solders here, the thick one and the thin one. I'm just going to cut off tiny bit of it, about that much, to drop in the red side. So even that's more than enough. I think half of it. I'm gonna do this for both sides. And I'll return momentarily. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I needed to open the door and let the fumes out. It's starting to get to my head. So, next thing we're going to do is we're going to solder this down. However, as you can see here, I currently have the 3D printing tip on. So I'm going to actually take this tip off. Always make sure it's cooled down by touching it to the sponge, so it doesn't have any effect to it. Alright, this one's cooled down enough. However, I still always wear a protective glove when dealing with something that's upwards of 400 degrees. Yep, that's a little bit warm. Not too warm. I could have done this with my bare hand, but as I said, better safe than sorry. I'm going to move this solder out of the way since we have these solder bits in here. Okay, I didn't put enough in the negative terminal. I'm going to put some more in there actually. Up. These tiny bits are hard to get a grip on. A little difficult. First I got too little, now I got too much. There. Big hands. Struggling to get it down in there. There we go. Now that I have those down there, I'm going to press the button on. That red light signifies that it's heating up. And once it has heated up, I will be able to melt this solder down into those holes to get it a more permanent connection. It's starting to smoke, which is why you always want to be well ventilated when using it. Same reason I opened that door. So there's actually a bit of solder already down in here. I'm going to first see if I can get some melt, because it's what's blocking this solder. There we go. That one's now in there melting. Beautiful. I'm going to pull up tweezers. This piece doesn't want to go free. Just go into the hole. It melts straight up. Then I just push it down, do the rest. I'm adding more solder after I do this because I want to get it fairly full in there and make sure it's all the way down. It's hard to tell. So this is the easiest way I can make sure I've done it. Now that I've done the negative side, I'm going to do the same thing to the positive side. Hopefully this side's a little more agreeable. But first I'm going to wipe this residue off. There we go. It's always good to have a nice smooth, clean tip. And melt this. It likes to smoke. Then just push it down there. Right down in there. Felt the wire down there. Which is good. I'm still going to take some extra solder down there. same method I did for the negative. Cut some off, put it in there. Accidentally, I'm going to actually cut this in half because I accidentally grabbed the thick solder. Okay, so remember, like I said earlier, I have thick solder and thin solder. I'm going to cut this down and melt it. Beautiful. Rip off the excess. And for good measure, I'm going to put this one into the negative. Having the same issue as I had before with this negative terminal. Really not liking the idea of having solder. Solder actually stuck to it. Not good. Try again. Wipe off the excess residue. Grab it by the tip. Well done. Now it doesn't want to, so we're going to cut off some more. Okay. Again, same procedure. Grab and drop. And then struggle as I try to get it in this little hole. There we go. Carefully touch it. Push it down. There we go. Nice and full on that one. Take this bit of extra and drop it in the positive. So what I'm doing is I'm just swapping sides each time until I have them both full down in there, covering the wire and the terminal. There we go. Beautiful. As you can see, in each of them, there is solder filling up the hole. See, I shake it upside down, it doesn't come out, which hopefully means it's fully attached. So I'm going to turn on the plug, and I'm going to test that it's, yep, as you can see, it's fully soldered in there. The LED turns on, unplug, the LED turns on. Move this to the off, so that's not on anymore. Move the LED back to the side. I'm going to actually move these a little bit more. Take one out of the pack. So this one is going to go over this. Seal it up. I'm going to cut some off. The reason I'm covering it up is because I don't want to have two exposed leads, positive, negative, so close to each other where they can cause damage. So I'm going to swap the head again back to the molten one. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to lock in this one. So we're going to follow the same steps as before. I'm going to take these out. One try. I'm going to tug check. Okay. Cut off the top. Okay. Clean that up. This one I'm actually putting my needle in here. Move it around some. Because that hole didn't like to stay open. Agreeable. This really doesn't want to cut. There we go. I'll just open up there. Now I'm going to do the same process as before. I'm going to cut off some filament. Okay. Cut this in half. I'm going to stick this into each one. This time I'm just going to go straight on with the thicker because it is easier to work with. I feel like this is going to be much too much for that. I'm going to cut this here. There we go. Cut this instead. This one is slowly going nice and smoothly. It goes in the hole all the way, perfectly filling that up. Beautiful. So now that that's down in there, the negative terminal is now done. And I'm going to repeat the process for the positive. Hopefully this time it's going to agree. And again, I just touch the tip to it. Loves to smoke up on you from up there. Ah, my soldering iron cooled down. It has an automatic safety function. To turn off the heat after a few minutes. So, you will go burning yourself. However, this means if you're soldering multiple things at once, you might have to turn it back on a few times. That actually messed up that solder joint because of the heat. And I now have to come over here, cut off some more, and drop this one. Alright, so I'm going to do the same thing as before. Get it as slow down as I can. Just touch this to the top. I'm going to wipe off the tip. It's got some residue in it. Solder, let's wrap its way around my tip. Becoming nearly impossible to get off. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to take the tip again. This time it's going to melt smoothly into the tip. Come on. Into the tip. See, the solder is actually cauterized the plastic. I can come down there and poke a hole in there. That leads to the wire now. I'm actually going to scoop out some of that solder. And just melt that tiny bit down. take this a little bit. Grab my tweezers again. Tweezers are great, but make it difficult to spacing. There we go. There. Now that's down there. I can wipe off this tip and put on this glove again. So now we're going to switch tips. Turn off the soldering iron, cool it down. Hear all that? The sound of heat being dissipated by the sun. There. And just like that. Get it out. Okay. Use my tweezers to grab the tip. Drop the tip on the sponge. Go down some more. And we grab our secondary tip. So this is the tip I like to use because it's flat. It makes it much easier melt a bit. There's a higher surface area than the other tip. And that's good. Down. Okay. Go there. Start as strong as you can. There we go. Alright, I'm reheating it up. Originally I was going to use the blue, but I'm just going to cut off some of this filament instead. Look just a little bit nicer. Cut off in here. Put this aside. Cut this piece in half. Down. Alright, it is hot now. Set that on top there. Yeah. And similar to the soldering, I'm just going to touch it with the tip. It's going to melt down. However, instead of melting down into a liquidated metal, this will melt down into molten plastic. Move around and use the seal off the top. I want to make sure I've completely covered the leads. See, that lead is still sticking out some. I'm going to grab this bit of glue and color and then it down to that glue is now fully covering the top, putting away any exposed leads. I know it doesn't look great, but it does the job of keeping myself from getting electrocuted. I'm going to take this other bit of black dye and rinse it off. Move the wrist in place. Now drop it down there. Pick this one up with the tweezer, put it in place and get it started to melt. Once it starts to melt, I don't need to tweeze anymore. The heat will hold it in. I'm just again gently melting it over the top. I'm more focusing on getting it into the holes than all over the top. See, this one I've already finished. With much less paint and stripe first. There we go, that's cooled down. So I'm going to drop this back through. To help gravity, I will have gotten it right back into the hole where we want. Push this back into place like that. There we go. Now I could just leave this here. However, that's going to be lazy, and I would rather melt it down in there so that it doesn't escape into a more permanent solution. Just the camera. There we go. So, take this again, move the soldering iron a bit closer so that we can work with it. And we're going to take this excess filament and melt it in place. But first, I'm going to see if I can just melt something like this and leave it on top just to get it early. Alright, so that's not really working, so we're going to have to just deal with that. Alright, so I take this excess here. It had some strings on it, that's why I brought its friend with it. And this friend is actually going to be more agreeable, I feel. Allow me to straighten it out. There. Actually cut this in half. When holding something hot, make sure to keep a good eye on it so you don't do what I just nearly did and melt into your part. See, I got lucky there and didn't melt anything. I could have, or I could have burned myself for not doing it. I'm gonna melt down this filament. Makes it dance apparently. It's gonna attach it to the plug and to the part at the same time. Trying to curl up, but not letting it. Just going around to the edge. Attaching the part directly onto the edge of the plastic. There we go. As you can see, I actually melted some of the plastic of the part. That just reinforces it even more when I just melt that edge, because now they're both being melted into place. Melting plastic produces a lot of fumes, which you want to be careful of, which is why I have the door open and I am letting the fumes out in the background. Alright, so this is actually too big of a piece, so I'm going to switch this one. Now this piece I'm just going to melt down, just like the other side. Slowly but surely. The gap is filled between the two. And I'm just going around the different parts of it and securing them. Go, and I can do the back. There. I'm being careful at the back because I don't want to accidentally melt towards the wires. So I'm using mainly filament rather than melting the piece in the back. There we go. That side is now fully done. This side I'm just putting a tiny piece back there and melting down. So what this is doing is fully securing the plug in place. Now that plug is secure. There. So with that, I have secured the plug here. I'll be able to just tape that cord down there in order to cover that up. And I have limited the amount that it's going to be blocking me while still having room to slide this in plug in the LED. Doesn't like. While it's going to be annoying to plug it in, it does plug in. That's the important thing. Now that I've soldered and melted everything, I'm going to do a proof that this still lights up. There we go. On, unplug, off, plug back in, on. So that proves that this is not a fluke, and I have indeed wired a plug onto either end, allowing me to connect and disconnect the glove wheel. One more time, plug in the piece, and then turn it on, light to up, unplug it, light off, plug in one more time, light off. This video is different than the one I usually do, so let me know what you think. If you want to see more of these, just let me know.